that when we're developing, we have to rely on our external world for everything. So if there's any kind of environmental failure with the care providers, with the environment itself, culturally, we will naturally turn inward and assume that it has to do with us.
Yeah.
Since we don't have a culture of health, a lot of people don't get their nourishment needs met early in life. If you want to heal, like if you want to build your life up from a place of, I want to be healthy, I want to expand, I want to be, I want to grow into the person I'm meant to be, then that has to be a priority that you make. And that may not be something that the culture tells you you should do or should prioritize.
Welcome to Deeply Well, a soft place to land on your journey. A podcast for those that are curious, creative, and ready to expand in higher consciousness and self-care. I'm Debbie Brown. This is where we heal. This is where we become. Welcome back to the show. Something that I talk about quite a bit, and if you follow me on Twitter or Threads, I'm known for a rant on this subject. But it's something that I find to be so core and invaluable to the journey of healing that I really want to share this in so many ways that it can get to the core of your being. Practice, process, and taking time to study your unique body responses and feelings to the experiences you've had, are having, and desire to have. It is so, so important. At this moment in time, we are really blessed to be alive in a period that has never been to this degree, at least in this iteration of humanity, which is we are understanding, unwrapping, diving into consciousness really for the first time collectively, and that's showing up in mental health conversations and conversations around trauma, self-care, and spirituality. Now, as things become more and more popular, we start to see them everywhere, right? Which means we are having an onslaught of really beautiful language, a whole lot of tools, and truly masterful bookworks that are moving through the world. But we're also moving through a space where it is becoming so mainstream that we're losing the nuance and we're losing the process of healing itself. And we're bypassing that sometimes really muddy experience that is so necessary for being on the shinier side of it and tweeting quotes that feel good, that we desire to live, and that people can perceive us as. But if we miss the process, if we miss the understanding of how our unique bodies are connected to this earth, to our experiences, and to our transformation, then we miss all of it. We miss the whole point. So I'm really, really, really excited today to bring a special guest on the show who I know is going to just expertly dive into the fibers of this so that you can weave all the prayers that you have for yourself in your life into the world and live them. Today's guest is Kymber Maulden, a nutrition consultant and a women's health coach who takes a somatic and trauma-informed approach to women's health to offer women a well-rounded and deep set of tools for addressing their long-term self-healing needs. Through both her own personal healing work and the professional work she's done with hundreds of women over the past few years, she's come to view everything in health and behavior through the lens of nervous system functions. Nutritionally, she works within the growing niche often referred to as pro-metabolic or bioengineeric, which places great emphasis on the impact of stress in all forms on the function of our cells' ability to produce energy. As she continues to work on her own self-healing and self-regulation with transparency and humility, she dedicates her professional work to supporting as many women as possible in developing these crucial tools for better long-term self-regulation and self-healing. Kymber, thank you so much for your work in the world, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
The work you're doing, it's monumental. I mean, I don't even think important is a word that can fully convey what it is that you do and what it is that you share. And something that is never lost on me is how grateful I am, even though the world is chaotic, to be alive right now. Because when have we ever had the opportunity to really heal ourselves at a cellular level and to change the trajectory of humanity, to change the trajectory of our families? So I'd love to start by first asking about your journey into this work, because this is not simple work. This is very layered, and it takes not just so much time and patience, but so much experimentation, so much self-experimentation. Yep. So what led you to the work?
Yeah. I think the simple answer is health crisis, like struggling with my own health and realizing that I needed to turn inward for support and really get to know myself in order to know how to heal myself. And so when the Western medical model didn't work, I turned to diet and like veganism and, you know, like a lot of really kind of strict dieting. And that also got me a little bit closer to myself, I think, because it like put the emphasis back in my hands. But I also started to realize that I was trying to spiritually bypass or like cleanse my way out of having a lot of trauma. And I think it wasn't until I started to work with the metabolism and specifically with women that I started to notice like the nervous system component over and over and over again in myself, but also with the women that I was working with. So like I was getting my clients mirroring my issues. And that's when I started to, I think, take the trauma component more seriously.
Wow.
So that's like kind of a, you know, overly simplified because there's just like so much detail there. But I think that like, I think that I've come to where I am now through struggling and realizing like I actually have to address this stuff. And as a result of that, realizing that like it's needed.
Oh my gosh.
Like you're saying it's so needed, but I didn't go into it like I can do this. Like I'm the champion of the people or whatever.
Right.
It's more just like I'm struggling. I need answers. As I, you know, got more answers and more tools and more wisdom and knowledge, I realized that this is a shared collective issue.
Yes. And you know, when you're on the path of really authentically living your life in purpose and not performative kind of cultural purpose, it's how we all find our work, right? It's like we, in some ways, we are these wounded healers or we are suffering inside, no matter what externally it looks like. And there reaches a moment where I think we break, you know, we just really break completely and say, okay, I can't be on the surface with whatever this is a moment longer. I have to go in. I think something that I've shared is, you know, in my journey, I was meditating for probably 10 years, which changed my life. I mean, just dramatically, changed my inner world dramatically, I should say. But I still lived with chronic pain that I'd had since I was 16 years old. And some days I wouldn't be able to walk. Like I was guaranteed 3 to 4 days out of every single month, I could not get out of bed. I couldn't walk. And I was having all these other issues. And, you know, the transformation, the consciousness I was beginning to glimpse inside of my spirit was not manifesting in the transformation in my life. Like I was still suffering in my body, in so many of my choices and my connections. And it wasn't until I decided to, I don't think I had a choice, but until I found somatic experiencing that I began to go inside and things changed. And I developed the process, the practices, the self-compassion to actually really be with myself in the pain so that I could clear it, so that I could accept it, so that I could live. And I think for, you know, I'm not a man, so I would like to speak to this from the lens of a woman, but I'm sure many men listening can connect to this. That is the part that is so hard to do. So many of us live in the intellectualization part, and we think going to cognitive therapy or getting all the books, well, I'm doing the work because I'm filling myself with knowledge. Knowledge is not enough unless it's integrated, metabolized, and embodied, which means it shows up in your behavior and your choices. And that can't change until we change the function of how we feel inside and how we experience this vessel that our soul is residing in. So I deeply connect to that. And, something an area I think I'd like to start is, this is a very, very new topic that studies are still being developed around. So depending on who your doctor is, they may or may not hold space for having this conversation, if any move forward in this. CPTSD in women. What is it, and how common is it?
Yeah, so CPTSD stands for complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think a lot of people know trauma as PTSD, so traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the difference is PTSD tends to be situational, so it's usually something happens to us. Again, you can have both, but there is a distinction, and I think it's important to understand the distinction, because I actually think that CPTSD is more common, and I think women are more sensitive to it, more potentially, like the potential of having it is potentially higher for women, so it's developmental. It happens over a longer period of time, whereas PTSD is something happens to you that threatens your survival. So you have this stored memory of something, like, say you get, like, a personal example would be I get hit by a car as a pedestrian years ago. And I was okay. I had some, like, bruises and stuff. But, like, for, I would say, a few years after that, I would have racing heart, all of the things that would, sympathetic dominant state would come up every time I would cross the street as a pedestrian. And it took me, that actually took me into somatic experiencing. And that was my first experience of doing somatic experiencing for that particular issue that I then took on and did for a lot of other stuff as well. Like, it was as a really, really heady, disembodied young girl, that was like my first taste of getting deep into the body and the somatic world and the nervous system. But there was a lot there that I didn't touch because I have a really high ACE score. I have a lot of complex trauma. So I did somatic experiencing for years, and I didn't resolve all of the things that I was struggling with. Like, there was a lot that stayed in my relationship patterns, and including, like, how I relate to myself. And I didn't understand why. Like, I was like, I'm doing all this work. I'm, like, feeling all the time. I have all these skills to deal with my system when it gets when I get triggered or get upregulated into this state where I don't feel like I can really ground or center. And what I have learned since working with complex trauma is that complex trauma is relational, it's developmental. And it usually develops over a longer period of time when you're younger and you're developing your sense of self. So it can often be, like, deeply woven into who you think you are. And whereas PTSD is survival based and it's kind of like you're afraid for your life, that's the kind of underlying vibe of having PTSD. Complex trauma is you're ashamed. Like, there's something wrong with me. Like, there's something wrong with me. Like, I need to, I'm responsible for the bad things in my life or the bad things in the world. So it's very much like, when you're younger, it's based on the fact that when we're developing, we have to rely on our external world for everything. Right. So if there's any kind of environmental failure with the care providers, with the environment itself, culturally, we will naturally turn inward and assume that it has to do with us.
Yeah.
We can't, like, we're so reliant on the external world for survival that if we were to say, oh, my mother actually has issues, like, that would be, that would be like a death threat for us or whatever. It's just not comprehensible for the developmental stage that we're in.
Yes.
So we immediately say, oh, there's something wrong with me. And this is, of course, like, deeply unconscious. So you develop at different stages with that narrative. And that affects how your nervous system responds to relationships, to changes in your life, to different stages where you would normally, I think, more seamlessly move into them. And I think for women, because first of all, women are just more sensitive to stress. Like, we have a nervous system and metabolism that is designed to carry life. And for that reason, because of our unique reproductive needs, we are more likely to be stressed out over certain things. We're more likely to have a nervous system that can get dysregulated, that ties in with our immune system, with our fertility, with all these things. So And then you take into the fact that like in this culture, women are, pushing ourselves more than ever to perform, to outperform men or to compete with men or to at least be on like an equal playing field with men. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities. And again, I'm not saying that like men don't have complex trauma or that that's not a real issue. But like as someone who is both a biological woman and also works with them, this is kind of like the focus of my work. And I feel like complex trauma is more common than we realize because, again, it's like more nuanced. And I think that a lot of women don't realize they have it until they start to work with their nervous system or start to work with their chronic illness. And then you start to, when you're not making the progress that you want to make and you start to learn about your patterns, like really get to know your patterns, that's when you can start to realize like, oh, that's what this is.
Yeah.
But there's not like a language for it in this culture. Like we don't talk about it, I think, in the way that we need to. And
it's so deeply layered. There are just so many things I want to dive into in what you just said. A couple things that I might pop in from time to time to clarify some things. If you're listening, I want to just make sure this can land where it needs to go. Because sometimes when we have complex trauma, we're also still gifted and maybe have all these other wonderful things happening for us, right? Like you may be brilliant, you may be creative, like we may play all these roles for people, but you still have that going on inside. So certain things that we call out, it's easy to reject them right away. Like when we say words like you feel ashamed, very often we connect the word ashamed with our own behavior of having done something wrong. And so when it's like, well, no, I don't feel ashamed of myself. I don't feel shameful. Sometimes shame presents as the tiniest seed of unworthiness at the core of your belief about yourself. So even when stressful things continue to happen, there's some part of you that accepts it because you think you are inherently broken or deficient, or there is something that isn't as good about you as somebody else. And so you may have developed these different systems like achieving or, productivity or saving.
Fawning.
Say that again.
Fawning, like
Fawning,
being the
yes.
good girl,
the
pretty girl, the one that smiles a lot, the nice one.
Or being righteous or being overly strong and hyper independent, And so those kind of the layering of those coping mechanisms for your experience become very often our personality. And when we sit inside of them, we can't see those deeper layers of where we're hurting. And if we can't see them, we can't feel them, we can't get to them. They can't be resolved. So I want everyone, as you're listening to this show, even if there's some way where you're like, no, I'm super strong. No, I'm not sensitive at all. Or I handle stress really well. All of that I'm certain is true in all the ways that it's true. But I want you to notice the ways it isn't. I want you to notice the places in your body that is not true, where actually after the third breakup or after the fourth betrayal by a friend or after, the second time you were overlooked for a promotion, somewhere deep inside, though you never said it out loud, you thought it was you, or you thought there was something inherently deficient about you that made your life this way. Notice the nuance of those tiny moments in the crevices. It's really important. Notice them. Don't get stuck there. You don't have to stay there, but perhaps write about it, set aside some time to think about it, because that's where the work is. Like truly, that's where the most important and very often the most beautiful parts of the work is. There was something else. There were so many things that you said. I wish I could do like in real-time replay. When it comes to, the understanding of women's bodies, because I want to call out some things for men and women. All of us can have CPTSD, PTSD, a whole host of mental and emotional, disorders and hardships and challenges. Sometimes the hardship for women and being able to be with that, and again, since I am not a man, I can just kind of speak to this experience. When for thousands of years, societally, you are looked at and crafted to be and forced to be a caretaker for everyone else and thinking about everyone else all the time. That is the baseline I think, expectation of women always, even as children when we're 2 years old, but we're getting babies as presents and we're putting a bottle in a baby and caretaking for a baby as a child. Like, it's ingrained in us to a degree we often don't realize, this programming of martyrdom or this programming of self-sacrifice. And so that can often get in the way, which means you're taking on more work, you're being strong for everyone. And so when we use words like sensitivity, like you might be highly sensitive or you might be sensitive to those feelings, you want to reject it. I'm really speaking for myself now, because for years I was like, I'm not highly sensitive. You know what I've been through? I'm so strong. No, I am. I feel everything. I feel everything. Being sensitive means that wiring inside of yourself that you are more prone to notice, to feel, to observe, to sense things that maybe other people aren't picking up on. And thank you for the biology of that, because I never knew that part of that is the divine orchestration so that we can carry children and be sensitive to those needs as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have, it's interesting to think about that, even if we decide we don't want to have children or it doesn't work, it's not in our path, we do have organ systems that are designed to work for two. So our entire body is designed to work for two. And for that reason, our stress response is, like, the brain is more sensitive to stress. So when we have a stressor, and again, I'm speaking averages, so there's like plenty of people out there that don't, that are outliers or whatever, but like on a whole, women's biology sets them up to be more sensitive to low blood sugar, to low thyroid, to adrenal stress. And that's why you see so much of the statistics around women's illness or chronic illnesses are affecting women in a predominantly higher rate. And I think part of that is the fact that we are pushing ourselves to, meet some idea of success based on a male-centric system to an extent. Like, we want to be able to succeed in things that men are succeeding in. And that's not all that we want. We also want to, have children and all this, but we're pushing it back later. So there's like all of these reasons why I think our bodies are taking the hit. And so being highly sensitive doesn't just mean that you, that you're weaker or something. It means that you're taking in more signals, potentially, that your brain is flooded. Because that's how humans work, right? Like, we take in signals, we interpret them, and then we get outputs. Yeah. And so if you're dealing with a lot, like if you're putting your body through a lot, then you're taking in a lot of signals and you're overwhelmed. You're overwhelming your brain. And so you're going to be highly sensitive because you're going to have more responses from the brain to the things that you're taking in.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I wanted to say one thing too, regarding the concept of like pushing away complex trauma or like any of these kind of like heavier, potentially like darker aspects of ourselves, more painful aspects of ourselves. Yeah. A really liberating practice that I have used myself and with my clients is parts work. And so that's like looking at yourself as this multitudinous being instead of just being like one person. Like, I am strong. You're actually like so many different things, right? So like, you can have this trauma, you can have these wounds, you can have these patterns, and you can also have all of these other things as well. So you're also beautiful and sensitive and creative and resilient. And you can also be like young and in pain, constricted, contracted, scared. And I think that's like, that's one part of the journey of working with complex trauma, and actually just acknowledging that you have it is knowing like, I have these parts. Yeah. And these parts need care, they need attention, they need healing, and I can still live my life. And, we just need to have a more language for it in this culture, and like more acceptance that that's what a lot of people's journey is it's actually like coming back to their true self through working and healing healing these, these parts.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I saw a stat recently. I was doing this amazing event with the Women's Alzheimer's the Women's Alzheimer's movement, who's just doing, Maria Shriver, goddess, doing phenomenal work, getting studies done and pushing women's health forward in all kinds of ways. The stat said that out of all the cases of autoimmune disease, 70% of the cases are women. Can you share what autoimmune disease is and what are some of the ways that it's being connected to having  and why potentially it might affect women more? And so this also speaks to chronic pain and
Yeah. So autoimmunity is when the immune system is not working properly. So it basically attacks cells within the body. It's not able to distinguish between self and other. And it can happen to different systems. So you can have autoimmunity of the thyroid, you can have autoimmunity of the digestive tract, you can have autoimmunity of pretty much every system in the body can be affected because the immune system plays a role in pretty much every function in the body. There's a tie there. And so although I can't necessarily say I don't fully understand the mechanisms of the connection to complex trauma and autoimmunity, there's a few things. One thing is, have you heard of ACE scores?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So ACE scores it stands for Adverse Child Experience. So if you have an ACE, especially like a 4 or more, then your chances of having any chronic illness, any addiction, there's like a whole list of things that you will potentially have in your life as a result of having an adverse child experience. So that is one of the things, the study, the ACE, the like large ACE study is one of the things that put complex trauma on the map. So there is a really strong tie there. Again, if you have these like early life environmental failures that affect a small child's nervous system, so puts you into a sympathetic state, pushes you to disassociate, pushes you to freeze and collapse, fawn, all these things at a really early age when you're still developing who you are and your brain's still developing. So as a result of that, the immune system is consistently being triggered when you're having this sympathetic state, when you're getting pushed into the sympathetic state all the time. So when you have, a upregulated nervous system all the time, your immune system is going to be disrupted by that. So that, I think, is the link. There is a link there between autoimmunity and complex trauma. As far as like why it's affecting women, again, like I think that partially that ties back into the fact that women have more sensitive systems. But one thing I will say, and I know this is like not a popular, stance, I think hormonal birth control creates a lot of problems for women because you're basically severing ties between the brain and the ovaries. So you're creating a disruption between the brain's capacity to communicate with your reproductive organs. And as women, like as reproductive beings, our immune system is like directly linked to our reproductive organs, to our cycle every month. And so when you sever that communication, you are disrupting the body's ability to regulate its immune response. You're also disrupting the body's ability to regulate its cortisol response. And there is data to link this stuff. And so I don't think that there's like any kind of solid studies that can say directly like autoimmunity as a result of birth control. But like there's enough data there to like make that connection, I think.
Yeah.
And we have like 65% or something of reproductive women in their reproductive years in this country that are on hormonal birth control.
My God.
Or birth control in general, but I think a large percentage of that is hormonal birth control.
And something I want to call out in regards to like the study aspect of things or having, quote unquote scientific quantifiable proof. This is all new. Right? It's not new in our bodies, but us making these connections and even studying women's health at all is incredibly new.
Yeah.
Incredibly new. Previously, whenever any kind of medical condition would be explored, they'd only study men and then they'd choose to often just half whatever the prescription is because they thought of women as kind of being smaller half of men. So there is so much we are just beginning to learn about our unique bodies that has never existed before. That's one. Two is studies require funding.
Yep.
Most things are studied and in front of you because it was funded by someone or something or a company of some sorts. So a lot of times medications, treatments, different things that we see a lot that we trust, the reason they're in front of us is because there is a budget to market them and there is a budget to get them looked at. And very often, anyway, I'll stay there with that.
It's a lot you could say there.
Yeah, don't want to get shadow banned, but it's just really important to look at a multitude of information and really see where the connections are. This is how studies are funded. This is how science advances, medicine advances, and humanity evolves and advances. We see these bridges. We make these connections. We begin to kind of begin whatever the healing journey is. And from there, we come up with our theories and we come up with, our solutions and our quantifiable proof. So I just want to put that there.
Yeah, that's really important. Actually, that's like a soapbox that I stand on a lot, is that with Western medicine, exercise physiology, nutritional epidemiology, a lot of it is still male studies or, male cultures in petri dishes. And so I see a lot of stuff that's being applied to women's bodies, like fasting and like extreme workouts and like very extreme diets. And I'm like, that's not going to serve the female physiology. Like we have no research to back that up. And I think, so I think that's really important. Like that's one of my kind of like bullet points for how I choose to work with women is like, is it catering to a woman's body? Is there a way that we can figure that out? Or is there proof there? Or does it intuitively feel right based on my knowledge of how female physiology works?
Based on your knowledge and your experience working with women, what do you notice that a lot of women do that is not actually beneficial for women? Like things that may exist in the mainstream?
Under eating. So like,
Really?
So like restrictive diets. So low carb, like keto diets.
Really?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about these diets.
Tell me about this, because after I had my son, I did keto for about a year. Tell me the things.
Yeah, and how did you respond to it? You felt good?
I did.
Yeah.
I actually something that I've been learning about myself. I've been in my own kind of experimentation phase with what actually works for my body. I spent 7 years as a vegetarian, and then I've tried raw veganism, and I was so sick the whole time. And I've actually found that I thrive by eating organic meat. I love meat. I eat meat. It for my body. And I know a lot of people will have different thoughts on this, and I'm sure people listening, and this may be disappointing. I'll hold space for that. But meat, like having meat in my diet, is really important for my vitality and my health. Yeah.
I wrote an ebook called Nourishing Our Sanity, and it's about it's a full-length ebook, like 2020, and it's about the importance of eating animals for women's physiological, behavioral, and mental health. And again, like there's plenty of people out there that disagree, and I'm not like peddling a diet.
Yeah.
And so
we're not convincing.
Yeah, I understand that anyone that wants to eat a certain way is going to eat that way, and we have the luxury in the modern world to do that. But that doesn't necessarily always mean that it's the healthiest. And I think also we don't have a lot of longitudinal data for diets. And I think that's a big thing that we, like, as a species, are not super great at like looking ahead, like understanding how we're eating right now is going to affect us in 5 years, 10 years. And that's like to kind of like go into the pro-metabolic bioenergetic component, like, or, approach to nutrition. We're looking at stress. Like that's a big component of what we're doing. Is our diet contributing to stress at the level of the cell, the physiology, the main metabolic organ systems? Are they actually getting what they need so that you're not running off of stress hormones? And I think a lot of diets and like approaches to health, they have like a short-term benefit. The short-term, you can feel really good. And I think a lot of people don't understand like what they're doing to their body like 5 years down the line. Especially, again, women, because we are so sensitive to stress and deficiencies. Like we're set up to almost like have like a brain that monitors where we're at nutritionally. And so
can you speak to that delay? Something I talked about on a recent episode was a doctor that I worked with, shout out Dr. Will Cole, the amazing, something that he kind of put on my radar is how much of our gut health is completely impacted by childhood food choices. And so, I had a working single mom growing up, and so she was busy, she was busy. We were surviving. There wasn't a lot of time. And so that's when McDonald's was on the scene. That's when a lot of these places. So I eat McDonald's almost every day, and the effects of that didn't start happening in my body till my 30s. Yeah. And my health started suffering. And I was like, how do I almost have leaky gut? Like I eat great. Yeah. But it was from some of that kind of, that childhood foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's definitely true. I think a lot of us have a lot of repair work to do as adults because, we live in a culture that even if you have money and you have two parents, they don't necessarily know about nutrition. It's not like baked into the culture. And then if you have like a broken home or you're, living in poverty, which was definitely like my childhood, then you're just kind of eating whatever is available.
Yeah.
And so I think this is like a big problem for a lot of us, that we do have these childhood foundations of like, malnourishment. And then we go into menarche, like we go into this like period that's really energy intensive for our bodies, where we're going from being a woman to, obviously men have similar things too, but for women, it's like you're going into womanhood, starting your period, you could actually become a mother. And we don't have the resources there to deal with that transition. So you'll see like a lot of women that start they start to struggle with their health in their teen years because that energy intensive transition into womanhood is not backed by anything. Like they have no foundation from which to actually do that well. So they end up with like, acne, they end up with mental illness, they end up with eating disorders, and that's when they're put on usually like birth control and antidepressants or something.
Whoa.
Sorry, I don't know if that was like that wasn't really a direct answer to your question.
No,
it was like a whole nother tangent.
I want to sit in this so bad. Oh my God, the nuance of this. Whew. Okay, hold on a second, because you really said a lot, and there are so many connections to be made and bridges to be kind of created from what you just said. So, can you go back to how is nutrition, lack thereof, in those teen years, those transitional years for women's bodies, how is that impacting mental illness, mental health, some of those conversations? I know a lot of, for those that are familiar with like BPD, borderline personality disorder, or different kind of disorders that affect your emotional responses, those are typically go undiagnosed, but the signs are first seen in adolescence. So yeah, please, however best to share, this is fascinating.
Yeah. So I think it's like important for just like the foundations of understanding nutrition to understand that like nothing in our body is produced for free. So like everything that we rely on to have, consciousness, to have a personality, to have a physiology is produced out of a chemical, something. Right? So like that's what nutrition is. It's not just like, oh, I'm eating because it's good for me. And it's like, no, you're actually eating to survive, to exist at all. And so that's what essential nutrients are. It's like we can't produce them, so we take them from our external environment and they become our internal environment, and then our biochemistry works. It just works. And since we don't have like a culture of health, like health norms, a lot of people don't get their nourishment needs met early in life. So I think because when we're younger, we're in a growth stage. So from an evolutionary perspective, like we're really important when we're young, right? Like we grow into a certain age, and then I like to joke that like, oh, you could eat cardboard and you'd probably be okay, and you wouldn't get an autoimmune condition until you're like 20, 20 or something. But like, so there's a lot of malnourished, dysregulated children in this culture, and that, moving in again to adolescence when hormones are changing, like your nature is moving you into an adult where you could produce life. You're becoming like a leader in the culture. You're becoming like a participant in the culture and a co-creator in the culture. And so you need all of that energy. And you haven't gotten it, or you haven't gotten it efficiently. And potentially, if you have, again, complex trauma, you haven't gotten enough of it to match the demands of your nervous system response. And so, so like, again, the nutrients that we take in, they all play roles in like, the enzymes, like the spark plugs that make everything work. Like those are built out of like minerals and proteins. So if you're not getting enough, your oxidation rate, which is usually pretty fast. So oxidation rate is like metabolism and metabolic rate and oxidation rate can be used interchangeably. It basically just means like how quickly is your body burning through its resources, like your cell burning through its resources. So most children have fast oxidation rate, like just naturally. So they're burning through their resources. But if they're not getting replaced, then you get to these like stages of important, developmental shifts, and you don't have the resources to like meet the demand. So this is, in my opinion, like what a lot of mental illness, and again, I'm not an expert in like specific mental illnesses, but I was diagnosed with OCD, anxiety disorder, depression, bulimia, body dysmorphia. Like I was medicated for all kinds of stuff and diagnosed with that, with like all of those things when I was a teenager. And like looking back, I had complex trauma and malnourishment. Like that was like, and no one asked me about that, right? Because we just don't have a language for that in this culture. And so, so I think for a lot of women, this is a similar path for a lot of my female clients that they go through, where they have this like really difficult teenage experience, and they'll often use, substances or something to like try to get through it. And then they're in their 20s trying to figure out what the hell happened. Yeah. And then in their 30s is when oftentimes they're like late 20s, second half of their 20s, 30s. So when the like deep healing is possible because they have a little bit more stability.
So much of what you said makes me so emotional for so many reasons. I just want to call out for people. There is a real truth and like being disadvantaged in every way at such a young age. It's like there so many people who have had challenging experiences when we, to bring back forward this idea of shame or something being deficient or just not right about you, like life just can't go well for you, and you're trying and you're striving and you still can't understand why things seem easier for other people. I remember personally having that feeling in college. I had to work so many jobs. Someone that meant the world to me was murdered. I got hit by a car, all this stuff. And just my life was hard. It was so layered and complex. And it's like, I was like, why can't I just get ahead? Like, why can't I have these ideas. I have work ethic. I have, a big, beautiful heart. Like, why don't things go well for me in the way I see them going well for other people? Mm-hmm. And I just hear from thousands of people. There are hundreds of millions of people truly that have these experiences. One, you are not alone. If you're listening to this, You are not alone. You are not deficient. Nothing is wrong with you. And also that thing that feels like projection, right? Like that looking, that noticing, that comparing, you are right. You did have less in every way. Your emotional needs most likely weren't met. You had childhood emotional neglect potentially. And then you also have all these other things where if you're not nourished in all the ways a soul, a being, a body needs to be nourished to live, there will be this sense that isn't just a sense, it's real, that you are slightly behind other people in life. Mm-hmm. And then you feel like you can't catch up. Yeah. So I want to call that out, that you're not crazy. You're not crazy. You're not crazy. Things were harder for you. Things were different for you. Healing is more challenging for you than it is maybe for the person who seemed to have gotten through that experience and they're doing just fine, and you can't understand why it's taking you longer or it's not happening. You're right. You're right. It's valid. It's true. You're right. I think from this baseline of where we arrived, and thank you so much for just the excellent teaching of all of those dynamics. It's so important that we understand that. Now that we have arrived here, I want to bring us back to like the deepest intention of my heart for this episode, which is building practice and process in your life, because all those things are true. They are real. And when we understand the complexity and how dynamic our healing has to be, that's when the transformation is able to happen. That's when the health in your body, that's when the health in your soul, in your brain, in your behavior is able to transform. And it can happen. It can happen. It will happen. But process and practice. So for all the things that have just been said, all of the layers of how we are very often starting not at ground zero, we're starting at ground negative, a million. From there, how do we build ourselves? How do we transcend those experiences and that lack of adequate attention and nourishment?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of things I could say. I think, for one, understanding that if you want to heal, like if you want to build your life up from a place of, I want to be healthy, I want to expand, I want to be, I want to grow into the person I'm meant to be, connect and live from my true self, then that has to be a priority that you make. And that may not be something that the culture tells you you should do or should prioritize. Because you really hit on something when you said, if you have complex trauma, you may feel behind. Like things have been harder, you've had to take longer, you may have had chronic illness. So understanding that healing means you're going to have to create your own trajectory and value system and ideas of success. And I do think in this culture, a lot of us are told that success looks a very specific way. And you should have, very specific milestones hit at a certain time, and you should look a certain way while you do them.
Yeah.
And I think it's natural for our species to an extent to be looking over our shoulder to see what the other person's doing and trying to do the normal or acceptable thing so you can fit in. And, we want to be accepted. We want to be, loved by others. But to an extent, you really have to take your life as your unique life and understand that it has to look different, right? So it does not have to look like anybody else's, and it doesn't have to move at the pace that, mother culture or some subculture tells you it should.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, I think, is just understanding that healing can be success in and of itself.
Yeah. Yes. My God. It's what we're here for. Ultimately, it's to be ourself, our most vibrant self. It's none of these societal constructs, even though that's the time that we live in. What I'm hearing in everything that we're saying, and I want to really drive home, is when we talk about self-care, this is what we mean. When we talk about the importance of self-care, this desiring of a life that feels softer, more nourishing, more beautiful, this is the step to get there. Self-care is not simply taking yourself shopping or doing something that's a pick-me-up for the mood that you're currently in. Self-care isn't something you do to distract or to be in performance with. It's what the words say. Yourself and care. You need to take care of yourself. You need to meet your needs. You need to find out what you need. If someone listening is really ready to dive into more of that process, what could be a couple first steps to say, how do I recognize what it is that I need? And how do I begin to create my system to meet those needs?
Yeah, I think number one is you have a body, and that body needs stuff. It needs nutrients, it needs light, it needs air, it needs movement, it needs touch. So are you getting those things? That's really important, because I think a lot of us can try to bypass basic stuff by getting supplements or eating a certain diet. And it's are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting touched every day? Are you getting sunshine, fresh air? Are you moving? So baseline stuff. Your body needs these things. I used to work with children. So my background is in child development. And I feel the kind of simple principles of what we teach children, how to perceive themselves and care for themselves and talk to themselves, all of that stuff still applies to you as an adult. And you have all these little children inside. That's what parts work is, right? You're taking care of all of your little children. So are all of your children taken care of? Are all of your parts taken care of? And so I look at how that shows up in the body, somatic parts, but that I think that can show up in your emotions, that can show up in the thought patterns that you have. Are you caring for all of these parts?
Yeah.
And then I think so that's one thing, is just caring for the body. You have a body. You can't bypass it. You have to take care of it. And then secondly, looking at ways that you can integrate into your life, or integrate your days into your body. I don't know if that's the best way to describe that, or, to frame that. But a lot of us are living in our heads. And so I think in this culture, we cater to that. We cater to what we call top down. which is like upper brain functions. We go through, that's what talk therapy is, even mindfulness meditation. A lot of that is just going through those like upper corticoid functions of the brain to kind of like narrate our lives, tell ourselves what's happening in our lives. So we have that where we're living, and then we have the felt sense, which is like everything underneath that. That's like the temperature, the like climate of our lives. How do we feel? And so like a lot of us, we have checked out of various parts of our felt sense in our bodies for a reason. It's not just like it doesn't happen. So telling someone to just like go drop into their body could actually be very scary and threatening and confusing for them.
Yeah.
So I would say like understanding, again, you have a body, you have to inhabit it and care for it, and you need to figure out ways that you can do that in like a minimal effective dose so you're not overwhelming your system by just like opening Pandora's box. But also understand we live in a culture that is very top down. And so we have like institutions and norms and environments that are catering to us being up here.
Yeah.
And so there's things you can do, right? Like go to a yoga class or like go to some somatic class, or, you know, like there's certain places where you can go where it's more socially acceptable to slow the brain down and drop down into the body, breath work or something.
Yeah.
But doing that yourself every day and finding little ways to cater to that, small amounts. Like you don't have to just dive in and then just expect yourself to feel everything all the time.
Yeah.
That's not safe or realistic. So you have a body, you need to inhabit it, you need to take care of it. And then also I think another one is grieving. I think that's actually I just got like goosebumps. From my experience of working with my own complex trauma, there's so much grief to be felt once you start inhabiting your body.
Yeah.
And I think this is true for people who have complex trauma and people who don't. Also, like I think complex trauma is a spectrum. It's not like a disease you have or don't have. So that's important to understand too. Like it's a set of embodied experiences, developmental delays, disruptions, stoppages in your body, in your brain as a result of things happening or, you know, environmental stuff happening. But like that can look so different for different people.
Yeah.
But even if you don't have any of that, there's a lot of room for grief when you're doing healing work, when you're doing embodiment work. And when we start to tap into stuff like stored memory in the body, oftentimes a lot of the things that we weren't in a place to feel in different phases of our lives starts to come up. And so, again, this is where you have to it's important to create space for that, to create safety for that, to create language and relationships around that so you don't just push it back down or feel completely flooded and dysfunctional.
That's so important. Thank you for saying that. I've shared this on the show previously, but I want to bring it forward again for those, especially as you're looking to grow your practice in grieving. It's so necessary to make time to grieve. I found that in some moments that have been maybe some of my most busy moments, but most charged moments, I'll literally set an appointment to cry. You know, like I'll look at my calendar and say, okay, you are going through a lot. You cannot open any of it up for the next 3 days. You just can't. But it's got to come out. So then, you know, I'll look ahead and I'll say, Friday, I'm going to drop my son off at school. I actually have the whole afternoon. And I'll settle into a practice. I have a grief playlist that has songs that I know really invoke me emotionally to feel whatever needs to be felt. And you just sit with yourself. And that'll look differently for each of us. I'm kind of a stoic crier. So I just have I sit there and then I just have like these waterfalls coming down my eyes, but I'm kind of still about it.
Yeah.
But you might, you know, there are moments where you might want to hold yourself to support yourself, put a little pressure on your body, maybe bring some scent in, maybe have textures nearby that feel good to you, have a temperature that feels good. But there's so many ways to make it uniquely your own. And I hope everybody will, because that part of the process is just invaluable. It's huge. Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah.
For everyone listening to this show and really thinking about ways that you want to expand on this new deepened journey, I want to always remind you that this is a slow, beautiful work. You do not have to get to the bottom of how your body works, how your body heals today, this weekend. In fact, I would like to encourage everyone listening to take the next 2 years to research, explore, and be with yourself without any judgment. You don't even have to quantify it for the next 2 years. Just observe yourself, just study yourself, and keep experimenting. Keep trying new practices. Anytime you want to run from a practice, stop doing it. Ask yourself why. On the other side of that question, there may be a very valid reason that leads you to the next thing you should try, or it leads you to one of the walls you have up inside for yourself. And then you have the opportunity to disarm it, greet it, release it. So take time with this. None of this has to be done immediately. All of it is meant to be in slow process. And in that slow process, as you're spending all this time, hopefully with your body, with your lifestyle, with your diet, with the different practices you take on, you also get to find a little bit more of your true self. You get to uncover the truth of your personality, the truth of your emotional responses, the truth of your desires, and the empowering feeling of knowing you have the ability to meet needs that may have never been met before inside of yourself. As we close out this show, Kymber, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Beautiful.
I'd like to ask, how can everyone connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Kymber Maulden. And you can also find me at my website, kymbermaulden.com. And yeah, that's mostly the social media I'm open to doing right now.
And all the information will be underneath this episode, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. Scroll down and everything is linkable so you can check it out directly from your podcast listening streaming service. When I close out the shows, I like to offer every guest an opportunity to share what we call here soul work. So after we've listened to this episode and everyone is kind of being with the essence of it, a way to be in process with it and integrate it over the course of this next week. That can look like a specific activity. It could look like an inquiry, a journal prompt of some sort, whatever you think might be best to explore after this episode is heard.
Yeah, I would say explore slowing down. So like look at what slowing down means for you and find a few things that you can do to anchor yourself into the moment, to slow down, to kind of observe what happens to you. And this, I would say, do this without your phone. Like do this without a screen. Because when we're looking at a screen or we're looking at a phone, that's usually what people are looking at, you're sympathetic dominant. Like you're actually triggering the convergent ocular functions that directly send a message to your brain that you need to be like really focused and kind of upregulated. And so I have clients take, 10, 15-minute breaks throughout the day to go and look at the sky because that actually triggers like a down-regulated state in the brain. And so it's slowing down and inducing a sense of awe, like intentionally. I think we might like stumble into those experiences in life and we go, why does that feel so good? And then we like want to go back there, but our lives are not catering to it. But I would say like just for an amount of time, do like an experiment. How do I feel when I integrate slowness and awe into my days? Because it's actually, there's science to back this up. It actually like improves the function of your brain and can combat stress.
It will change your life.
Yeah. And it'll make you want to be here more.
Yeah. Yeah. It will make you want to be here. It'll make you find so much beauty in the ordinary.
Yeah.
The tiny joys. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Take a moment to rate and review this podcast. 5 stars, please, if you feel so called, and anything you'd like to write and share. As always, you can find me on Instagram at Devi Brown. And until next week, namaste.